Hi, I'm Ted Kofi, and this is the second in the series of videos I'm calling The Fight for Humanity. This one is all about brainwashing. First of all, because it's going to appear on my YouTube channel, if you could kindly hit the subscribe button, share, comment as you like. It's also going to appear on Instagram. Um, I wonder if any of you have heard of either of these characters. The first one is called Septimius Severus. Okay. The second one is called Quintus Lollius Urbicus. No? Okay. Well, you are unlikely to have heard of them. One was the Roman emperor who, in 208 AD, came over to Britain to personally supervise the extension and renovation of Hadrian's Wall to keep out the Picts in Scotland. And the second one was the Roman governor of the United Kingdom, acting as the appointed local lord, local agent for the Roman emperor back in Rome. Both were black men. So it doesn't surprise me at all that most of you won't have heard of this. And it goes to the question of whitewashing history. There is reason, very, very good reason for this. The study of eugenics, the word eugenics derives from two Greek words. The first one is eu, which basically means good, and genics, which basically means growing. So with eugenics, you're growing something that is good. The point of eugenics is that it involves two things. One, it means that you restrict the breeding of people who are classified as not good, uh, of poor quality, with inferior genes, and that sort of thing. You inhibit their breeding. And the second part is you encourage the breeding of those who are selected to be uh, uh, perceived as having the better quality genes, more intelligent, more able physically, intellectually, and so on and so forth. And eugenics really took off. Actually, it's been running since Plato's time, but it hadn't been weaponized, it hadn't been industrialized till about the end of the 18th century, when people in Europe became absolutely obsessed with this kind of scientific racism. The idea was to make sure that only the best were enabled, and that the less able or the backward were disabled, somehow swept off the board. Now, it's interesting that around about the same time, there was this notion that Europeans needed to carve up Africa. So they went to this conference of Berlin, I think it was 1894, 1895, and the European powers basically split up Africa, which is why if you look at the African map, you'll find so many straight lines. I mean, it's difficult to kind of draw a squiggly border unless you're following, say, the contours of a mountain range or the flow of a river or something of that nature. Far easier just to draw straight lines and boxes on the map, which is why Africa looks the way it does. And the Germans' interest in the Conference of Berlin was what they called Lebensraum. Now, this was going to become something that would come back to haunt the whole of Europe later on, because they felt they did not get enough Lebensraum, which basically means living space, in Africa. And so it was that after the First World War defeat for Germany, Hitler got his own back by starting the Second World War. He then launched Operation Barbarossa, which was the invasion of Russia. And again, what he was looking for was what he called Lebensraum, space for them to live. Now, curiously, the Nazis were obsessed with this notion of the master race. And it was all based on the scientific, pseudo-scientific racism of eugenics. So they were looking for that Aryan master race that was superior to all others. And Hitler, as we all know, and his eugenicists were obsessed with bloodlines and who was pure and how it was going to be maintained as pure and so on. And actually, this thinking was low key spread across Australia, Canada, America, and wherever people of European origin went. Now, here's the historical significance for Africa of Eugenicism. It provided an intellectual rationale for one of the biggest crimes against humanity, which was the transatlantic slave trade, on the back of which the wealth of America was built, on the back of which Britain made fortunes while leveraging its power in Africa at the same time. So the idea of racial purity kind of made it okay to kill hundreds of thousands of people by just throwing them in the water across on the Atlantic crossing. If, well, they were bad cargo, they were ill, they were unfit, maybe you wouldn't be able to get the money you wanted for them, and then dump them into chattel slavery ad infinitum in the New World, which America was. And of course, they had huge plantations, cotton in the Caribbean. The Brits owned sugarcane plantations in Brazil and Southern America. Again, more labor was needed to till the fields and this sort of thing. And those countries became fabulously wealthy. But the whole point was, by invoking this idea that there was a master race and an inferior race, you could get away with it. It was no crime. It was like if you kicked something that was not 100% human, it was okay. You could get away with this. Now, before anybody makes this purely about race, in my opinion, in this battle for humanity, is actually one of the streams down which it runs. Because before, the story of race was a story of class. In Europe, we had the feudal system of government. I remember in my A-level classes, Mr. Steen used to say, nul terre sans seigneur. What he meant was that there was no acre of land which didn't have a lord, and the lords had dukes and kings above them. So also society was hugely stratified, and of course, the further down the social ladder you were, you reached a point where you really had no rights. You were just the plaything of the lord who owned your patch to do with it as he chose. Of course, he wouldn't want to completely destroy you because he'd need you as a man-at-arms when he had to go and fight a battle. And the way the feudal system worked, the lords above him would issue a levy for X number of men whenever conflict was required. He would provide it to his lord, and then that lord would owe a certain levy of men to the king if he was called up to go and fight a war. So this system of social stratification in the Middle Ages and the early years, power derived, in their opinion, as the story was told, from God. Kings ruled by divine right. They were almost descended from kings. And so they could more or less do what they wanted. Of course, later on, the battles were fought, and these monarchies became not absolute, but constitutional. However, the principle of dividing, slicing, and dicing society into many competing groups, such that the king or the lord above them all could play one group against the other, was something that's long been established in Western history. It just had a different avenue. When it got to Africa, at the Conference of Berlin, it manifested as the theory of racial supremacism, which low-key still runs to this day. Now, when I talk about brainwashing, what I mean is that we have all been groomed to look at life a certain way. The reason I actually feel quite qualified to do this talk is that I've been groomed to look at life a certain way as well. I was exposed to all of the whitewashing of history that if you're white, that you were. there would have been different outtakes. What you would have learned was that somehow you were worth more than me based purely on my colour. Back in the old days, in feudalism, a noble, there were certain colours that serfs couldn't wear. For example, serfs couldn't wear the colour purple. I think because the dye was very expensive or something, and it could only be afforded by noblemen. And then later on, the kings decided that only they could wear imperial purple, or royal purple as it was called. But in those days, perhaps you could also tell from a distance what class a person belonged in. But now, after Eugenicism and after white supremacism, race, the color of your skin itself, was imbued with a certain power. What does this do to all of us? First of all, it makes white people think they don't have anything in common with black people. Imagining how it feels if I was black under those circumstances, which I am, what I would also feel is that my situation and circumstances are different to that person's. So in a situation of extreme conflict, white people, black people, people of different races would have great difficulty working with each other. So if they faced a common threat, it would be very difficult for them to rise above that common threat unless they knew clearly that this is a danger that's affecting all of us. But imagine we've been brainwashed to think that, look, white people have a certain level of privilege. It's things that happen in every common or garden everyday life. You know, the experience of a black person in an office is totally different to the experience of a white person of the same rank, of the same, a job specification in that same office here in Europe. So the differences are many and varied. Now, the reason people behave like that, because that behavior is absolutely, it's A, inhuman, and B, completely toxic. It's completely wrong. But people repeatedly follow these patterns of behavior, and it has two consequences. If I'm doing something which I know is A, immoral, and B, wrong, the only way I can continue to do that behavior is if I deny that I'm doing it. So I live in denial. Or I pretend that it's not happening in my environment. So that is how you have a situation in which there are many white folk who do not experience racism will tell you institutional racism is a figment of Tet's imagination. It's not. It's very, very real. But if I take the perspective of a white person, let's say if I was white, I would think that, look, I'm not actually a bad person. I know the difference between right and wrong. But what's going on out there seems beyond my control to fix. Ergo, I'm not responsible for it. So, yeah, I'm not racist, but racism is still going on. I'll give you a little example. When I post anything that has to do with race, it's a bit like dropping crystals of fine, highest grade kryptonite onto Superman's chest. People scurry, people who aren't black, scurry away from that post. Like, it was like, you told them that, okay, guys, I'm throwing a box of anthrax at you. People scatter. Why? Because of the conflict that's going on inside them. One, I would argue that because we are all human, we all know that racism is wrong. Absolutely everybody knows that racism is wrong. However, we have been conditioned and brainwashed into repeating behaviors that perpetuate racism. And as a result, the only way we can live with ourselves is to pretend it's not going on. Say, well, it's not conscious or it's unconscious, it's this and that, the other. Whatever it is, you're dealing with a behavior of denial. Now, When a person is willfully doing something that they know isn't right, something else has got a hold of their mind. They're not in charge of their minds. It's like they're doing that in autopilot. And that's why a lot of people say that, well, look, I'm not responsible for racism, because the behaviors that result from it's as if on autopilot. Now, in feudal times, if the lord behaved a certain way to the serfs, um, back then they may possibly not know that what they were doing was wrong. But now, owing to the independence movements, owing to the rebellions that have taken place, the class rebellions, owing to the start of communism and so on and so forth, we all know about human rights. Now we're fighting for the rights with people of different sexual orientation. Now we're fighting for the rights of women, which is half of the human population, for God's sake. It's taken us this long, but we all now have a sense of right and wrong, and yet we often default into behaviors which are completely toxic. Two more things I just want to mention. The first is what drives this brainwashed behavior that we manifest. It's the media. Not just the media. The media does two things. It gives you information, and it also withholds information. That's why you and I, till a couple of days ago when I was researching for this post, didn't know about, I still can't remember his name, Septimius Severus, or Quintus Julius Ulricus. We should have been taught that in grade 5, in the way in which I know for the United Kingdom, say Alfred the Great, in the way I know for Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, in the way I know for South Africa, Nelson Mandela, in the way I know for Egypt, Anwar Sadat, you see. But these guys have actually been removed, and that's the function of the media, which works educationally in our leisure time and so on, and educationally in the education curriculum as defined by whoever runs the education of the nation. Of the nation. So now the brainwashing is maintained by the media. So what the media has done with this pandemic is ramp up so much fear in the lives of humanity that people can't see that almost everything that's been told us about this pandemic has been a total tissue of lies. In fact, there's a group of 1,000 lawyers who are taking Davos, the World Health Organization, and a few key individuals to court for breaking the Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Code caused many very high-ranking Nazis to be executed for crimes against humanity. But let me cut back to this. The point is that we have been told a tissue of lies on the back of which the biggest ever vaccination program with an experimental biological agent is being promoted, not just in one country, worldwide. Now, there's one detail that I'd like to put out about the vaccine program. There's a virologist and immunologist called Dr. Mike Yaden. He used to be a vice president of Pfizer. He's retired or resigned now. And he was talking about the new variants. To be honest, I've heard somebody call them the scariants, because literally it's a better name than calling them variants. He said that research was done between two strains of virus, and the viruses were about 20% apart in their genetic material. There's a 20% difference, one virus to the other. And people who had caught the first virus and survived it, their blood was exposed to the new virus, which was 20% different to the first virus. And guess what happened? the antibodies in the uh, uh, in the blood that was tested realized, ooh, that is a cousin of the infection that we dealt with 20 years prior and attacked the new virus. Now, that was a virus 20% different over a 20-year period. That's the kind of genetic memory our immune systems carry. According to this expert, Dr. Mike Yaden, when a mutation takes place of a particular of the same virus, the other virus wasn't the same virus. It was like a relation of that virus. It was in the same group of viruses. But if you've got a variant of SARS-CoV-2, which is what we're dealing with here, what he says is that no mutation of that virus will vary by more than 0.3 of 1%. 0.3 of 1%, meaning that it's 99.7% similar to the original virus. So when they talk about the South African variant, they talk about the now Indian variant, they talk about the Kent variant, or whichever variant they're going to come up, the Brazilian variant they're going to come up with, it is a very close sibling of the original thing that mutated. He said that what he said, Dr. Mike Yaden said, was that your immune system, if it's had a shot that can protect itself, that can protect your body from the original, this mutation won't change that much. So if you got immunity from the original virus, you'll be able to handle the mutations that arise. Meaning that the idea that we need booster shots against all these variants, in his words, filled him with disquiet, and he said he could not think of any valid reason why such, and he called it a lie, I'm quoting Dr. Mike Yaden, should be told to the public by the health authorities of this country. As a result of which he concluded, the only reason you would do that is if you actively intended to do harm to the people that you're giving these so-called booster shots to. Now, I made the allegation before that I have worked out clearly that this whole pandemic is about creating an opportunity to depopulate the planet. And that is why this is an existential threat to genus Homo sapiens, as we have always known him. And of course, if you're panicked, or if you are put in a position where your life will be so truncated if you do not have this vaccine, there is an argument which says, well, what choice do I have? Now, the purpose of my video is to try and empower people to take their power back from the psychopaths who would take our lives. Take your power back. And you take your power back by being careful about the information that you take on board. In fact, anybody who goes against the current narrative is called a conspiracy theorist. Actually, everything is being inverted. The conspiracy theorists are those who are telling lies, like the fact that we need top-up boosters to protect ourselves against the scariants and look, it's like taking baby off a candy. All they have to do to ramp up the pressure again is for somebody to say, oh, we got a new scariant. This is the Little Giggleswick by the Sea variant, and it's absolutely awful. It'll really kill people in swathes, so we must protect the NHS and so on and so forth. And by the way, you need to come and have another shot. And if you've been even given a vaccine passport, okay, what they can tell you is that your vaccine passport lapsed because you did not take the new variant. The fear is pervasive and ongoing. So we are being brainwashed. The stuff we have been taught, we have been groomed to believe and know, has separated us one from the other, to the extent that though we form 7 billion people, a few who control the media are playing us like puppets on a string. Please think about this. Please check the facts that I'm saying. Please do your own research and know this, that the media that is carrying these awful narratives, I'm a journalist, they're lying. They're not telling you the truth. Not only are they not telling you the truth, they are withholding the sources of truth, and they're working with the social media platforms and so on to take off anything. I mean, this what I'm saying now could be thrown off for causing disinformation. In fact, a new law has just come in which says that even if you give, a new law has, they have tabled a bill, rather, I should say. I've got to be very careful with facts on this subject. Um, what they're saying is that if what you say is lawful but harmful, they will put pressure on social media channels to remove that on pain of horrific costs and charges and consequences for that social media platform. The question becomes, who decides whether it's harmful or not? Are politicians? What, you mean the politicians who are owned by pharmaceutical companies? The politicians who can't line up a narrative without changing their mind every couple of months or so? The politicians who watch while those who pull their strings determine which way we're going to go. Are they going to be the backstop for our defense? I don't think so. But when you, as an individual, wake up and start to say no, everything will change. Final thing I'm going to say is that I heard an anecdote today, and what he said is that what we're going through now must have been long in the planning. For you and I, we woke up one fine morning, we were told that something had come out of Wuhan. We weren't involved in the planning, so we didn't know what was coming. Those who have been planning this thing have planned this a long time ago. This vaccine came out with such indecent haste. Many experts suspect that the vaccine was ready even before they announced the so-called virus. And so we're playing catch up. I'm playing catch up. You're playing catch up. But what they've done now is that they've tipped their hand. Everybody can see where Big Pharma and the powers that be, the elites that be, everybody can see where they're going. And the anecdote said that it's like a 10,000 meter race. When you make your burst for the line, whether it's a last lap, whether it's 2 laps from the end, you better make sure that you reach the tape, because if anybody catches you up, even one person catches you up, you won't be able to maintain your momentum. And so we are dealing with people who have put all their money on this roll of the dice. They are desperate and will do ever more psychopathic things to get their way. And they are counting on you worrying about what people think about you to keep you mute. But you know what? Our entire species is at stake, because what these people are doing cannot be for the good of mankind. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe, as I said, and share this with your friends. Discuss it, whether you agree with me or not. The important thing is to stimulate debate and for some of us to stand up and say, actually, do you know what? You can stuff your little ploy at trying to gain world control. Thank you.